Y'all remember, if you want to ask a question.
The Altshuler Institute for Tree Studies is a nonprofit organization devoted to promoting trees, and they typically have conferences once a year. I was the president of the organization for 9 years, and I helped start it. As was mentioned, TRIZ is a Russian acronym for Theory of Inventive Problem Solving, and it was created by this fellow, Genrikh Altshuler. And one of his quotes that I like was written in a book called Suddenly the Inventor Appeared, which is a book he wrote for high school students. And he said the process of solving technical problems, and I think today we can say any problem, technical or non-technical, is accessible to anyone, important to learn, and very exciting to work through. We can teach everybody to invent. And Altshuler wrote this book, Suddenly the Inventor Appeared, and he would teach a principle associated with trees in the book. Then he would present a problem, and he would say, to solve this problem, an inventor has to appear, and then, dear reader, the inventor is you. So you're the inventor. Altshuler had a very interesting life. He, like Einstein, he was a genius, and he worked as a patent clerk for the Russian Navy. So during World War II, he was in the patent office, and he had access to all the patents coming in at that time. And the Russian system for abstracting patents is exemplary. So many of my Russian friends who still do research in trees and want to research patents, they go to the Russian database because they have an excellent system of abstracting and categorizing patents. You don't have to read the whole patent because the abstract is so good you can get the gist of it and with a small amount of reading. And so Altshuler began to study these patents, and based upon, he learned 4 key things from studying these patents, and I'll share those 4 things with you in a moment. And from these 4 key things, he created this system called TRIZ. And he, after the end of World War II, he wrote a letter to Stalin. And he said, you know, the country's in shambles and the economy's a mess, but I think I've got something that can help. Well, as a result of writing that letter, Altshuler was arrested, and he was sentenced to 30 years of hard labor at a coal mine in Siberia. So he got hauled off to Siberia, and he had a choice of either working in the coal mine or refusing to work and getting thrown into the prison next to the coal mine, the Gulag. And he felt that, well, if I work in this coal mine, I'm certainly going to die of exposure. I'm not going to last very long. So he chose the prison route. He was tossed into the prison, and there's many stories about how Altshuler used TRIZ to survive in the prison and actually solve problems associated with the mining of coal in the coal mine. And when he was in the prison, he found out that professors from universities all throughout Russia were also in prison. So he was able to continue his education and continue his work in prison. And use the expertise from all these PhD professors to help solve problems. And when Stalin died, they let all these people go. And but Altshuler was very critical of the Communist Party and wasn't shy about vocalizing it. And so they said, well, we like what you've come up with in TRIZ, and you can use it, and you can teach it, and you can write books about it, but you can't make any money from it. So he made his living writing science fiction stories. And he would use TRIZ to come up with the plots for those stories. And so that's Altshuler in a nutshell. He found, his initial work, he looked at 200,000 patents. And he found 40,000 patents that were interesting, and he discovered 4 key things. One was the definition of an inventive problem. And Altshuler found that the key to innovation resided in understanding the conflicts of a system. So he would look for functional conflicts in a system. And there were 2 types of conflicts that he was finding in these patents. One is a situation where a function conflicts with itself. So I might want the temperature of this room to be 68 degrees, and Tom might like it to be 72. And we both want it at the same time in the same place. So that's a function conflicting with itself. or he also found situations where one function is conflicting with another function in the system. So if I'm Boeing and I'm responsible for that airplane, and I'm interested in improving the function of reliability, but if I do it at the expense of if I do it in a way that causes all of my parts to have a larger size, then the function of weight loss is going to conflict with the function of reliability, and I'm going to have a problem there in my system in terms of weight targets and reliability targets. So what most people do when they see conflicts is they try to avoid it, and Altshuler said, no, don't avoid the conflict, because this is where the heart of innovation is. And what you really need to do is to dive into that conflict and expand it and luxuriate in it, and out of that will come the innovation. And so what most people do when they face conflicts is they compromise. I'll go with a mediocre weight and a mediocre reliability and live with it. Well, Altshuler hated the notion of compromise, and he felt that the team ought to be able to innovate and come up with a new solution that provides a win for all the functions that are involved in that particular conflict. So he defined what an innovative problem was by studying these patents. And he was looking for patents where people had conflicts in their system, and they successfully resolved these conflicts with a new innovation without compromise. And so that's why he found 40,000 patents of interest out of 200,000, because these other patents were just simple solutions based upon an extension of what people already did, and many times you wouldn't even get a patent for that, but sometimes they're issued. Then he also created a measurement system for how innovative a patent was. So Altshuler was able to look at the abstract of a patent, and he was able to assess on a 1 to 5 scale how innovative a particular patent was, and he was looking for patents that were more than just a natural extension of what you already did. So he was looking really to study patents at levels like 2, 3, and 4. A level 5 would be something that Einstein would do. Then he began to catalog, how were these functions resolved? So if I have a conflict in a system between two different functions, and somebody came up with a win-win solution, how did they do that? And Altshuler began to catalog principles that people were using to resolve certain conflicts in systems. And he found that similar conflicts were being were being found in a variety of different systems, and similar principles were being used to resolve those conflicts over and over again in the patent database. And he thought, boy, if I could catalog, what these conflicts are and how people were resolving these conflicts, that could be really useful to people who want to do problem solving. And so that's what he began to do in the patent office. And I'll show you how he did that in a moment. But for example, if I'm interested in a conflict between reliability and weight of a moving object, there are only 4 key principles that have been used over and over and over again that Altshuler was able to find in the patent database to successfully resolve a conflict between those two functions. So he would tell a team that's working with a conflict of reliability and weight, brainstorm on this and see if it comes up, you come up with any new ideas, and then brainstorm on this, and then brainstorm on this, and then brainstorm on this, and chances are you're going to successfully resolve your conflict because other people that have had similar system conflicts were successful utilizing these principles. So that's what he began to do, and he originally had 40 patterns of an invention principles that could be used to resolve conflicts. Then he also noticed in the patent database that systems were not evolving by chance. So systems were evolving according to certain laws of evolution. And he found 8 laws of evolution by which systems were evolving. And now we know that there are a number of lines of evolution inside those laws. And there have been, modern TRIZ research has found 12 laws of systems evolution and about 600 lines of evolution inside those laws. So you can analyze where your technology sits at this particular point in time, and you can look at how much of the evolutionary space has been taken up and has been utilized by the current technology, and then you can guide your brainstorming along lines of evolution that have not been utilized or fully utilized yet and come up with a new innovation. So with TRIZ, you can understand the current conflicts in your system and what principles could be used to resolve those conflicts. And then you can also look at the evolution of systems, and you can kind of triangulate on a new innovation. Now, TRIZ doesn't do the work for you. You do your own brainstorming, and all the laws of brainstorming still apply. So what are some of the laws of brainstorming? What are some of the things you do when you're brainstorming? You have a... Do you criticize the ideas once they come out? No, you just record them, don't you? So anytime anyone so first of all, you need a good cross-functional team, because the team is really important, and you need a team of knowledgeable, experienced people. And then when the team members come up with an idea, you don't criticize it, you just record it, you just write it down, no matter how wild or crazy the idea is. And then you deal with those ideas later. So TRIZ is a method of brainstorming, but it guides your brainstorming. And it guides your brainstorming in areas that have been proven to be very effective for the kinds of situations you're dealing with. So that's how TRIZ works. So today, more than the people that are doing the current TRIZ research, more than 3 million patents have been explored. The couple today, Altshuler, he got Parkinson's disease, became too ill to work around 1985. He wrote books on TRIZ. Boris Lotin is a natural problem solver and had patents of his own before he discovered TRIZ. But he was at a train station in Russia, and he forgot to bring a book with him to read on the train. I went into the bookstore at the train station, found a book by Altshuler about TRIZ, started to read it on the train, and he says he became very upset because he realized that if he would have known about this a lot earlier, his problem-solving work would have been much easier and much quicker. He could have solved the problems he solved, he could have solved a lot easier and a lot quicker. So Boris actually went and found Altshuler, took some training from him, began to do TRIZ training himself, solved many problems at the company he worked at with TRIZ, and then said, I can probably do this full time and make money from it. So he was the first person to actually hang up a shingle and say, I'm a TRIZ professional, and I'm going to solve your problem using TRIZ and charge you for it. And so he did that, and he also taught seminars in TRIZ, and Alla Zusman was one of the her company sent her to one of his seminars, and she got very interested in TRIZ, and they fell in love, got married, and so started their own consulting company. 1992, I think, they immigrated to the United States. They live in the Detroit area. They call their company Ideation. So they've continued Altshuler's research and have done the bulk of the research work in TRIZ since Altshuler passed away. They have a website, ideationtriz.com, and what I'm going to be showing you today is really based on Boris and Alla's research work. I'm going to talk to you about 3 different things. One is I'm going to show you a systems approach, which is a tool that Altshuler originally started with called the 9 boxes, and I'll explain that in a second. And then Boris and Alla kind of expanded it. So you can use a systems approach to guide your brainstorming, and we'll do an exercise with that. And then we'll talk about TRIZ operators. So Altshuler started with 40 principles, and he had looked at 200,000 patents. Well, now 3 million patents have been looked at. Boris and Alla have identified 440 operators for technical systems and about 140 operators to resolve conflicts in non-technical systems. And they've also found certain of these operators have been used over and over again when dealing with measurement systems. So I put in your notes, and we're going to talk about what TRIZ principles can you use to guide your brainstorming when you're working with measurement systems. And then I want to actually show you some of their software because it's a more of a complete TRIZ approach. So typically I get upset if I'm in an audience and somebody's talking about software, but so I thought about that, but I thought, well, I don't get anything. There's no benefit to me by sharing this software with you, but I found it useful. And the other interesting thing is you don't have to buy it. You can go to Boris and Alla's website and you can rent it. So you can say, I want to rent this software for a week, and you can pay a very small fee and rent it for a week, so it's not very onerous. But I'll show you what the software looks like. The two things you're going to take home from this and you can practice with are the systems approach and the TRIZ operators that are useful for measurement systems. And then if you want to deal with the software, you'll at least see what it looks like, and then if you want to rent it, you have the opportunity to do that. Altshuler started out with 9 boxes, and so what he would typically do with a team is he would create columns, past, present, and future, and then he would create rows, the supersystem, the system, and the subsystem. And when teams were dealing with a problem, he would have them fill this out. You know, what was happening, what is your system, what has happened in your system in the past, what is happening in your system in the present, and then he'd give them some of these laws and lines of systems evolution, or maybe they would just brainstorm, what do we think is going to happen in the future? And they would do that for the supersystem, the system, and the subsystem, and get some insights from that. And I wrote a paper with Boris and Alla one time. We published it at one of the Altshuler Institute conferences, looking at the 9 boxes associated with the unveiling of the automobile. So if you look at the automobile as a system, then you had to have subsystem elements associated with an internal combustion engine, 5 patents associated with the cracking of oil to create gasoline. And you have to look at the supersystem. You know, once you have an automobile, at the first place Henry Ford took it was to his father's house. He wanted to give his father a ride. And his father said, there's no way I'm going to risk my life over a passing fancy. He refused to get in the vehicle, his quadricycle. So you needed roads, you needed gas stations in the supersystem. So how do these things interact with each other? So Altshuler would do the 9 boxes. Boris and Alla do it this way. They also look at past, the system function problem, the present, and the future. They also look at subsystems, system, and supersystems, but they also consider input, the system and the output, the cause, the problem, and the effect. And so we're going to look at that with a real problem. So this is an actual problem. How can the length of a caged poisonous snake be measured? So there was a company that raises poisonous snakes and then periodically milks these snakes to capture the poison to use for medicine. So the poison gets processed for medicine. And what they want to do is they want to explore a variety of different diets. So they want to have quite a few snakes, give each snake different diets, and they want to find the diet that causes the snake to grow the fastest. So that's the work they want to do. And they know that they can hire professional snake handlers to handle these snakes, but they don't want to do that because professional snake handlers are expensive. So here we are, across the street is Grand Rapids Community College, lots of young people, we can get them cheap. So let's hire these young people at minimum wage, but to work with these snakes. But we don't want the young people handling the snakes because they could get bit and die. So we don't want to kill them. So how can we measure the length of a caged poisonous snake? So that's our problem. So we're going to use the systems approach to guide our brainstorming and see if we can come up with some ideas. And I'll show you a very simple software called brainstorming software. All their softwares have this system approach in it. So define the problem using the systems approach. So Plato, it's better to answer one question 8 different ways than 8 different questions one way. So this is a basic definition of the systems approach. So I look at the system. So name the system you wish to improve or create. So this topic might seem trivial, but it's one of the most important topics because by answering this question, you determine the systemic level from which to consider the problem. So we've got, in our problem dealing with these poisonous snakes, how would we define the system? How would you define the system? What is in the system? Okay, the snakes, we'll put the snakes in the system. Is the snakes the only thing in the system? What else would you put in there? Okay, so the food that we're going to give the snakes can be part of the system. The diet probably might be considered an input, like an input to the system. Okay, so there's got to be a cage, right? So we're going to have a cage as a working area to handle the snakes. Anything else we should have in the system? Okay, the students, right? So we'll get these Grand Rapids Community College students. They'll be in the system. So we have in the system so far, we've got the snakes, we've got the cage, we've got the students. Food is going to be an input to the system, right? Anything else in the system? There should be a measuring device of some kind in our system. We're going to have to figure out what that is, right? What about the super system? What's the super system? Pardon? The infrastructure. Maybe we'll do this work over at the community college. They might have a laboratory we could use as the super system to put the cages in. Maybe the temperature of the room, the air quality of the room could all be part of the super system, right? And what would be subsystem elements associated with the snake problem? So stuff that would have to feed into the system. We already talked about, food as an input, but it could be a subsystem element as an input. It could be food, could be water, things that have to go into the system to make the system work. So many times teams really stumble and have to really think about, how are we going to define our system? And I've facilitated a lot of FMEAs in my life, and when you're doing functional block diagrams, teams really stumble on, what is our system, what's inside our system, what's outside of our system, and how do these things link or how do they relate to each other? It requires, it's not a simple question, it requires some thought. So the system approach. So ideality, it talks about the sum of all the useful functions over the sum of all the harmful functions. So here's a question. How modifying the system structure could influence the problem we're trying to solve? So here's a example. So in the design of off-road motorcycles, it's desired to maximize fuel storage capability while minimizing weight. Regard the structure of the system as a resource for problem solving. Use hollow tubes of the motorcycle frame to store fuel. Okay. So we've got our system. We've got the students. We've got the cage. We've got the snakes. So for these elements of our system structure, how could we modify any of those elements to help find ways to measure the snake? So it could either be anything associated with the students, the cage, or the snake itself. Okay. And then what do we do with that? Okay. So I'm just going to click on that. You don't need software to do this exercise, but it's kind of fun to just use this and just to record our answers. Okay, what else can we do to modify the system? How could we modify the system to help us measure the length of the snake? So there should be a rich stream of ideas coming out. Okay. So we want to put a scale. And weigh. Correlate to length. Okay, what else could we do with the cage? Yep, Dan? Okay. So use a noose to grab the snake. Maybe two nooses, one for the head and one for the tail. Stretch and measure. Okay. What else can we do? Something we can do with the cage. Let's just focus on the cage. Yep. Okay, make the cage so it slides in, forcing the snake to elongate so it can be measured. All right. What else can we do? Okay. Still have the problem of getting the snake to use that measurement scale, but it's a thought anyway. What else can we do? Yep. Pardon? Okay, so what are you suggesting? And that's not costly because the snake's going to have to eat anyway, right? Yeah. So how are you going to do this? Well, you could make the cage in two parts. Food on one side, snake on the other. Make the snake crawl through a measured tube to get to the food. So we kind of make the snake stretch out in the tube, and then we've got that tube for the scale. Yep. Okay. Use software to determine the length of the snake after we photograph it, right? What else could we do? Yep. Okay, the snake is part of our system, so this is modifying the system. So we embed. And measure electronically. Okay. What else could we do? So we're telling you anything with the cage, anything with the snake, anything with the students, yep. Okay. So, put the snake. So here we might be doing something with the super system. Maybe it's a gas, maybe it's temperature. So it could be a gas, temperature. Sedative in the food. So that would be an input, modifying the input, right? A sedative in the food would be an input. The gas, a sleeping gas, could be part of the super system, modifying the super system to help us solve our problem. Lowering the temperature of the cage, so the snake becomes very lethargic. And then handle the snake relatively safely. Well, I still wouldn't want to do it. Okay. What else could we do with the students or the cage or the snake itself? I could tattoo the snake and measure the change. Tattoo markings. What else could we do? Okay. Okay. Anti-venom shots. Did you ever see that movie, The Princess Bride? You've got the prince, you know, he's going after, you know, the woman of his dreams, and he has to outsmart the smartest man in the world. So they decide to have a contest, and they have 2 glasses of wine, and there's poison in one of the glasses. And so the smartest guy in the world gets to choose, you know, which glass he's going to sip from, and then they're both going to drink together, and whoever gets the poison dies. So the smartest guy in the world keeps trying to distract the prince, the hero, so that, and then every time he distracts him, he switches the glasses. And then finally they both drink, and the smartest guy in the world chokes and dies, and the prince is alive. And the princess says, well, how did you do that? And he said, well, I poisoned both glasses, but I built up a immunity to it over time, the poison. Yeah. Okay, anything else we can do with the students or the snake or the cages? We're going to have a bunch of snakes and kill one every once in a while, right? How about the super system? Any other ideas? Any elements from the environment might eliminate the problem or reduce its severity? We already talked about introducing a gas, maybe introducing cold to make the snake more lethargic. Anything else we could do with the environment? Any other ideas? What about inputs? Can we change an input to improve the situation? So we said that food is an input, oxygen is an input, water is an input. You put an electronic tracker in the food, right? Put an electronic tracker in the food and then measure length. Measure water consumed or air consumed. measure oxygen consumed, translate that to size maybe. What about outputs? How can we influence an output? Normally with a team, if we were really working on this problem, I would continue brainstorming on each of these, spending more time, but we need to cut it short so we can cover other things. But, typically teams will come up with 50 or so ideas doing things this way. How about outputs? What are outputs? Snake can shed its skin, right? Can shed its skin. Any excrement associated with the snake can be measured. Could be a output. Maybe I could force the snake to, cover it with latex and then force it to shed that latex, so I get more frequent skins. Artificial. Cause. How can we influence the cause? What's causing the snake to grow? Can we influence it? We already talked about food. That's a possibility associated with cause. Any ideas on cause? So this is how TRIZ works, is that we'll present something to the team, and then the team will think about it, and you can come up with an idea, and if anybody comes up with an idea, we just capture it. And if somebody doesn't come up with an idea, then we move to the next thing. And typically when people do brainstorming exercises, you're brainstorming on a problem and it's like popcorn, a few ideas pop and then all of a sudden a bunch of ideas come out and then the ideas kind of taper off and then that's the end of your brainstorming session. But with TRIZ, once you've done that, you switch to a different principle and do that all over again. Then you switch to another principle and do that over again, so that you're getting a lot more ideas. And because you're brainstorming on principles that are known to be effective with the kinds of things you're working on, the idea quality is better, and you get more ideas. So that's how TRIZ helps. Anything with cause? One thing we talked about cause, with regard to the students, we said that the students could take anti-venom. So that's something that deals with a cause, or it might be an idea that comes out in terms of cause. Any other things come to mind in terms of cause? How could we influence the cause of the problem? We could remove the venom from the snake, right, surgically. Maybe we don't have to use poisonous snakes at all. Maybe there's another member of the same snake family that's non-poisonous, where the growth patterns might be the same, so the diet would be applicable, but the snake's non-poisonous. So use a non-surrogate for the study. Then predict what the growth should be and just make sure that the diet works with the poison snakes. So that would be influencing the cause. What about the effect? How can we influence the effect? ideally, is this working? Yeah. So ideally, to clean these peppers, you know, you say, what's the big deal? You just take a knife, you cut off the top, and you scoop the seeds out. Well, that's fine if you've got one pepper to clean, but if I've got 3,000 peppers I need to clean this afternoon, that's not going to be a very effective way to do that. So I've got a situation here where I want to really thoroughly clean this pepper, but if I thoroughly clean all the seeds out of the pepper, it's going to take too much time. So I've got a system conflict between removing the seeds and taking time. Now what Altshuler did to categorize his information is he used generic functions. So he came up with 39 generic functions, and he would say, okay, for this pepper problem, you know, pick something associated with removing seeds. So I'm looking at all of these and I'm saying, you know, what could be associated with removing seeds? Well, maybe function number 26, amount of substance, could be something associated with removing seeds. We may have 4 or 5 things that we pick here associated with removing seeds, maybe productivity down here. And then we might say, well, I need some function associated with taking time. So I look over here, 25, waste of time, you know, that's an obvious one. And there could be several others here associated with time. And then we would start to look in Altshuler's matrix. So if I want to get more of the seeds clean from the peppers, and I'm really concerned, instead of time I picked speed here, I'm really concerned about the more seeds I pick out of the pepper, the smaller my speed is. So I've got a conflict between amount of substance and speed. And then there's 4 numbers here, and these numbers relate to principles from the patent database that people have used to resolve that kind of conflict between speed and amount of substance. So I look at these inventive principles. So Altshuler started out with 40 of them. And I look at number 35, 29, 34, and 28. So 35 says change a parameter. So it says change something about the pepper, the concentration or the density, the degree of flexibility, the temperature. 29 says use pneumatics or hydraulics, use air or water for inflation. So I might say to my team, could we use air or water for inflation to do something about taking the seeds out of the pepper? Can we do something to change the concentration or the density or some state of the object associated with the pepper? 34 says reuse parts. So is there some part of the pepper we can reuse in a different way or modify to help us clean the seeds out of the pepper? 28 says don't even think about doing this mechanically. You'll never solve the problem that way. So we can't have a mechanical solution to it. Well, in 1973, this patent was processed for processing was peppers. Essentially, you put the peppers into a chamber and you pressurize it from 1 atmosphere to about 8 atmospheres of pressure. So you have 8 atmospheres of pressure outside the pepper, 1 atmosphere of pressure inside the pepper. The pepper develops micro cracks where it's weakest around the stem, and the pressure equalizes, so you have 8 atmospheres of pressure in the pepper, 8 atmospheres outside the pressure outside the pepper. Then you release the pressure, so you have 8 atmospheres of pressure in the pepper, 1 atmosphere of pressure outside the pepper, the top flies off and all the seeds come out with it. So I can clean a bunch of peppers in a hurry. So you might or might not be able to come up with that patent from using Altshuler's matrix. But the same principle, what Boris and Alla in their research have done, they would say, well, this is an operator. And the same operator has been used over and over again. They see in the patent database in a number of different places. So suppose I wanted to split diamonds. So I've got diamonds that, so I've got till 3:15, right? Yeah, I will. So I've got some diamonds I want to split, and what I want to do is find the flaw in the diamond and then break the diamond right where the flaw is. So I can do that with a hammer and chisel, but I'm probably going to destroy a lot of diamonds. But the same principle that works for peppers works for diamonds. So I take the diamonds, put them in a pressure chamber, only this time I go up to 1,000 atmospheres of pressure. I allow the pressure to equalize, so the pressure where the flaw is in the diamond, it becomes the same 1,000 atmospheres of pressure, the same as the pressure outside the diamond. Then I release the pressure outside the diamond. I've got 1,000 atmospheres of pressure where the flaw is, 1 atmosphere of pressure where outside the diamond, and the diamond splits exactly where the flaw is at. Cleaning filters. I've got a felt filter and it clogs up with sand and it needs to be cleaned. Well, the same principle, slowly increasing the pressure, then abruptly releasing the pressure, will clean the filter. Or shelling sunflower seeds or any kind of nut, walnuts, pecans. How do they shell them? Well, they put them in a pressure chamber, slowly increase the pressure, hold till the pressure equalizes, then release the pressure on the outside, and the shell flies off of the nut, and you have a complete nut without the shell. And so what Boris and Alla have done is they said, well, here's an operator, slowly increase, then abruptly drop the pressure. So if you were dealing with a problem like this using their software, the software would suggest to you, why don't you think about slowly increasing and abruptly dropping the pressure. Now, that's how you use TRIZ principles. So, but there are principles from Boris and Alla's research that are useful for measurement systems. So when you're developing or improving a measurement or control system, there's 3 approaches you can take. You can bypass the problem of measurement and control, and there are certain TRIZ operators associated with how to do that. You can direct ways to improve the measurement or control, or you can use indirect ways to improve measurement and control. And then what I've done for you, and I put it into your handout, these are TRIZ operators from Boris and Alla's research associated with these 3 approaches. So you can pick, where you start with your team. You can use all 3 approaches, or you can try one approach and see if you're more successful there. But these are principles. So if I was working with a team and I had a measurement problem, we said, well, let's try the approach of bypassing the problem of measurement or control. So there's one TRIZ principle, eliminate the need for measurement, yet still achieve the objective. So consider changing the object, system, or process so that measurements are not necessary. So eliminate the measurement and still reach the objective. So for example, I might be using statistical process control, and I find out after using statistical process control, after 7,000 or 70,000 parts, I need to replace the bearing in this particular machine. So now I say I just always know I need to replace the bearing before 70,000 parts. So then I don't need to measure anymore. I just use preventive maintenance. So there are one thing that's good to do is just to practice, think about these principles, and then come up with some examples. Detect instead of measure. So if regular measurements are taken to ensure parameters do not exceed specified limits, consider finding another way to detect whether or not the limit is exceeded. So one graduate student from MIT told me that he worked one summer in a factory that made varnish in Sweden, and they always put an onion into every batch, and nobody knew why. And so they finally decided, well, let's go talk to somebody that used to work in the factory a long time ago and find out what the onion's for, because they were afraid to eliminate the onion because it might be something important in the creation of the varnish. So they found this 95-year-old guy in a nursing home who used to work at the factory. He said, oh, the onion's very important. He says, when the onion is cooked, you know the bath is ready. So they were using it as a thermometer. So dual detection instead of measure. Example would be go-no-go gauges, using a model or copy. We talked about using a photo rather than measuring off the part. Controlling anti-process parameters. So these are different TRIZ operators that you can use. Direct ways to improve measurement or control. There's 4 different principles to guide your brainstorming around that. Indirect ways to improve measurement or control. There's 4 different principles associated with that. And then I just threw in an example for you associated with each of those. I wanted to show you Boris and Alla's software innovation workbench. So this is a little toolbox. If I go to their toolbox and I want to go down, develop a system for measurement, all the things I put into your notes are there in their software with some examples. So they've got a variety of different examples. So sometimes with a team, you'll read the operator or the principal. You'll look at some of these examples, and then it'll trigger some ideas of your own to guide your brainstorming. So that's in their software. And I put that information from their software into your notes so you can use it to guide brainstorming with your teams. On the full process, there's an innovation situation questionnaire on the left-hand side. If you click on it, the instructions for how to do it are on the right-hand side. And I usually make a team go through all of this front part before we actually meet. It takes about 6 hours to complete this, but it's the same kind of thing we talked about: supersystem, system, subsystems, input, process, output, cause, problem, effect, past, present, future. Every time you come up with an idea, you click on the light bulb and you record your idea. Then very thorough analysis of resources that are available to you in your supersystem, system, and subsystems, because if you can come up with a solution using existing resources, you will have a low-cost solution. And then they have something called problem formulation. So what this is you create a systems map. So I can create a systems map, and I say I have a poisonous snake. And that's a useful thing for me. And I want to measure the length. And that's a useful thing for me. But I want to measure the length using low-cost labor. Which is useful. Or I could measure the length using snake handlers. And that could be harmful. Well, it could be useful, but the problem with the snake handlers is it counteracts my low-cost labor. So you create a system map of what it is you're dealing with, and you would do this as thorough as the team wants to do it. And then I come over here to directions for innovation, and then the software looks at my functional analysis and finds the conflicts in the system, and it finds the leverage points for innovation. And then you read through these and you decide which ones you want to work on. So I want to work on resolve the contradiction the snake handler shouldn't be provided to avoid low-cost labor. Maybe I want to work on all of these, or maybe I just want to work on 1, 3, 4, and 5. We submit those into our software, then go down here, and when I decide I want to work on this one, resolve the contradiction of the snake handlers, it says, okay, there's 4 different ways we could approach that using TRIZ. I want to look at all 4 of these, and then here are principles associated to guide our brainstorming associated with this first one. So the software, what you do is you determine what your system map looks like, and then you feed that into the software. The software finds the conflicts in your system and then pulls up the appropriate TRIZ operators to guide your brainstorming. So typically, if I'm working with a team and we're using software, it takes about 3 days of work using the software to really thoroughly analyze a problem. And almost always we come up with patentable ideas. We've got a good cross-functional team and a good problem. We usually come up with patent applications at the end of the 3 days. So I wanted to show you that, and like I said, you can rent the software for a week if you want to use it, or if that's something that's useful to you. But I've given you, anyway, the systems approach, and I've given you TRIZ operators that are useful for measurement systems. And Dr. Junichi Taguchi, he spent a lot of time with us at Ford, and he was a great problem solver. But he said, 90% of my time in solving any problem is in determining what to measure. So TRIZ can help us to determine what to measure. Okay, any questions? Yeah. I don't have any patents with just my name on them, because what I wind up facilitating teams, and the teams get the patents, and they never put my name on anything. But I've been involved in lots of, in the generation of lots of patent applications, but I don't have my name on any of the patents. Yeah, when I was at Ford, we wanted to develop a brand new steering gear for the Jaguar vehicle, because Ford owned Jaguar at the time. So we got one of our suppliers that makes that steering gear, and we brought in their experts from all over the world into Dijon, France, and I facilitated a 3-day session using TRIZ, using this software actually, and we came up with, I think they came up with 9 patent applications out of those 3 days. There was a session I did with Bosch where they had a problem with a braking system, and we actually met in the Detroit area, worked on it for 3 days I facilitated them using this TRIZ software, and I think they came up with 6 patent applications. And in LinkedIn, one of the guys that was in that session linked in with me about 3 or 4 years after that. He said they were still using ideas from that session in their development process. Not too long ago, one of the oil companies had a big problem with one of their valves wearing out prematurely in their system. That was causing their oil wells to shut down at $1 million a day penalty. And we spent 3 days working on that, and they came up with a really elegant solution associated with that was essentially no cost.
We're actually a couple minutes over. I'm sure you can take questions after the session's over, right? Sure. In case somebody, so you can talk to them later. In case you want to leave the room, we got the next speaker coming up in 10 minutes. So I'd love to be able to do this right up to the last second, but other people might want to come in. You might want to go to the next session. So thank you all. Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it.